Hey folks. I'm just listening to this new LP that I got. I had to order it all the way from Germany. It's called Palestine, Music of the Intifada. And we're talking about the first Intifada here. This came out in 1989, distributed by Virgin Records Limited in the UK. So that tells you a little something. I don't think a corporate mega record company these days would go anywhere near something like that. And I just wanted to read you some of the liner notes because I'm learning a lot, and I think it's very instructive. Anytime you actually learn real history, as I'm constantly learning, it's just more and more refutations of Hasbara lies. So one of the key lies is that, this started on October 7th, or it started with the Second Intifada, or it started with Hamas, or whatever. Let's take a look at what this says. And this will be a little long because there's a lot of text. I'm just going to read it to you. So on the first side of this liner note, it says the Palestinians. So this is the liner notes for an album called Music of the Intifada, 1989. And this is the story of the Palestinians as of 1989. The Palestinians. Palestine appears on few maps today, and yet over 5 million people consider themselves to be Palestinians. They are divided by many borders, but united in their hopes and wishes. The Palestinians are the descendants of all peoples who have lived in the land between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean throughout history. They gradually adopted Arabic as their own language following the Arab conquest 1,350 years ago, and most also became Muslims, although 1 in 7 Palestinians is still Christian today. At the end of the last century, the Palestinian Arabs began to feel the impact of a movement of colonization based in Europe. This was the Zionist movement, established by Jews who believed that the only answer to the problem of anti-Semitism was to build a Jewish state. For historical reasons, they decided that this state should be built in Palestine. Sounds like a pretty fair rendering of the history to me. And notice that they used the word colonization back in 1989, back before everyone and their dog was talking about anti-colonialization. Now, of course, people in the anti-colonial global south were, but I'm talking about here in social justice circles. You could say that it's become a trendy word. I'm not saying it's an inaccurate word. I'm just saying, if I was a Zionist, I might say, oh, people are just, using the latest jargon. No, this has been recognized for a long time. And of course, you can go back to the earliest Zionist texts and find out that they considered themselves colonists, proudly so. The Palestinians believed that this movement could only realize its aims at their expense. They feared that the settlers would build up their strength until they had the numbers and power to take the land from them. This is what Benny Morris, the Israeli historian, who is actually a staunch Zionist and has gone back on some of his excellent research and is justifying the genocide now. He said this. He said that transfer and expulsion basically were inbuilt and inherent in Zionism, and that the prime motor of Palestinian unrest, and when they weren't expelled, Palestinian flight, was the fear of territorial dispossession, and it was a reasonable, rational, fact-based fear. As a result of the First World War, Britain gained control of Palestine. It supported the establishment there of a, quote, national home for the Jewish people. This is the Balfour Declaration in 1917. During Britain's 30 years of rule, immigration brought the proportion of Jews in Palestine's population from under 1/10 to nearly 1/3. So, whatever you want to say about that increase, those Jews who arrived cannot rightly be called indigenous in the same way as the Jews who were already there. We at least have to make that distinction. And if you make that distinction, then you clearly have to make the distinction between the Palestinian Arabs who lived there, who were of equal status to the Palestinians Jews, to Palestine's Jews, I should say, and the European immigrants. And prior to the 1950s, most of the immigrants were from Europe, I think. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but the real wave of bringing in Jews from the East, from Arab countries, started after the creation of the state, I believe, in the 1950s, but don't quote me on that, and I'm open to being corrected on that if I'm wrong. In any case, at least the Jews who came from Arab countries could claim to be from the Middle East, and they also had exigent circumstances, much of which was Israel's doing, to move to Israel. So their status as indigenous is probably somewhere in between. In 1947, Britain handed over the problem of what to do with Palestine to the United Nations, which voted to partition the country into two states, one Arab and one Jewish. The Palestinian Arabs did not accept this, as they still made up 2/3 of the population and owned over 90% of the land, but their wish to have a united state in the whole of Palestine was being disregarded, and they were being offered less than half of their own country as their state. Keep in mind that there's no religious extremism in the mix here. This was not an Islamic demand. This was a Palestinian civil society demand. So there's another lie debunked. This was just a people, independent of their religious faith, insisting that they should have some majority rights to the land in which they are the majority. And any hostility they had to Jews was predicated on an accurate observation that a movement made up of European Jews was trying to displace them. Conflict intensified as the day of the British withdrawal approached. The Zionist military forces gained the upper hand and took control of many Arab towns and villages. In the space of a few months, over 700,000 Palestinians became refugees, believing that if they stayed, they would be massacred by enemy soldiers, understandably, because the Israelis were massacring people deliberately to scare other Arabs, Palestinians, into leaving. They were also starting so-called whisper campaigns, starting rumors that either the Arab armies were going to invade and there was going to be a war, or that the Zionists were going to come and destroy villages. So either way, it's terrorism. And by the way, this started in November of 1947, so don't let people tell you that it was the massive, scary Arab armies attacking, who really were disorganized and underfunded. And I think the U.S. State Department, I believe, maybe it was in 1967, there was certainly an understanding that the Jewish forces were better organized and they had the tacit backing of the Western powers. So about half of the 700,000 Palestinians, that's 350,000, were driven from their homes before the State of Israel was declared in May 1948. A good number of those were driven into the area now known as the Gaza Strip. Most of their land was occupied by Israel, the remainder by Jordan and Egypt, until 1967, when that too was seized by Israel. 3/5 of the Palestinians are now exiles from their land in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and further afield. 1.5 million live under military occupation in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, while the remainder are third-class citizens of Israel. That is an accurate way of saying it, because the second-class citizens would be the Mizrahi Jews, who are that's the so-called Oriental Jews, and it's a controversial term, but many in that community claim it. You could say Arab Jews. They're the second-class citizens, given substandard housing, made to live in development towns, the legacy of a traumatic expulsion and, coercion to leave their previously comfortable and peaceable, mostly, homes in Arab countries, in a combination of persecution by Arab governments, but also the State of Israel completely going along with that and fomenting their terror. So once again, more terrorism to try and drive more Jewish immigration to Israel, followed by receiving them as second-class citizens, spraying them with pesticides, forced sterilizations, and all kinds of truly white supremacist second-class treatment. So the Palestinian Arabs who are citizens of Israel would be third-class citizens, because the Mizrahim have been told to look down on them, just like, poor Southern whites, in the Dixieland strategy, were encouraged by politicians to look down on blacks, which Bob Dylan wrote a great song about, but now we're very far afield from the topic. They are not prepared for the situation to continue in this way, which explains why the overwhelming majority of Palestinians support the Palestine Liberation Organization as the expression of their national aspirations. It also explains why the Palestinians of the West Bank and Gaza, goaded by 20 years of repression. Oof, remember those good old days when the repression and the occupation was only 20 years old, which is to say the occupation of West Bank and Gaza? Unbelievable. I remember back in 87, 88, and it felt like it had been forever. But since before I was born. This 1989 is before many of you were born. It's crazy. These Palestinians launched a mass uprising, the Intifada, in December 1987 and sustained it month after month thereafter in spite of shootings, beatings, deportations, and mass arrests. It was primarily a non-violent resistance that was met with brutal force by Israel, Yitzhak Shamir, or was it Rabin, who were prime ministers around that time, said that Israel's policy in response to the Intifada was force, might, and beatings. That's the quote. The Palestinians want a state of their own in Palestine, and they want the refugees to be able to return. They insist on being represented by the PLO in any peace moves. They do not want a solution to their problems, which creates a Jewish refugee problem. They want a just settlement which will enable all the peoples of the area to live together in peace. Let's read that again. They do not want a solution to their problems which creates a Jewish refugee problem. They want a just settlement which will enable all the peoples of the area to live together in peace. And this is dedicated to a number of people here and all that. And then on the back, there's a description of what each song is about, titles, if translated, such as From the Camp is Born the Vision, Al-Rabieh, which is a traditional Palestinian song, The Palestine Pledge, Undying Wounds, The Bells of Victory, The Intifada and the Revolution Mountain, We Are on Our Way, My Homeland is Not a Suitcase, Mount of Olives, In the Name of Freedom and Democracy, it's a catchy title, Dear Mother, not to be confused with Tupac's Dear Mama, We Have Had Enough, wow, expresses the feeling of all Palestinians that life on the land cannot be exchanged even by the world's riches. If my friends returned without me, expresses the plea heard every day by every mother in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Mothers are urged not to cry at the possible death of their children, but to pray for the living. Pray that the land can feed us. Pray that the poor can remain free on the land. Sacrifice and death are not the end. Martyrs live as they create freedom. Songs of the Palestinian uprising reflect the reality of a people for whom there is no going back. As they fight the forces of occupation, they are creating the material conditions of their self-determination, independence, and freedom. As songs celebrate, they assert work and hope for a better tomorrow. Well, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow have come. And so far it's not better, at least not any ways we can see, but at least we're here talking to each other. And someone like me is listening to music like this instead of, I don't know, Paula Abdul or something, who is Syrian, maybe Jewish too. Yeah. Free Palestine, y'all.